with Xi Jinping that both leaders agree, for example, that the Strait of Hormuz needs to reopen, and soon. But the two world leaders have not shown the rest of the world much tangible progress on any of the key issues that we thought were on the table. So with us now to talk about where all this goes, Andrew Harding is a policy analyst at Heritage Foundation, former special assistant for Asia on President Trump's National Security Council. And we're also joined today by Chris McGuire, who's a senior fellow for China and emerging technologies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Andrew, you want to take this first on, whether it was even fair to expect something big out of this week, and whether it's a good or bad thing that we didn't get anything huge. How do you see the week?
I think coming into the summit, I think the interest was this would be a maintenance check on the U.S.-China relationship. I was not expecting any major structural changes to the U.S.-China relationship. We remain adversaries. We remain in a new Cold War and remain to take competitive actions against one another. But ultimately, I think there can be value in some of the agreements that we've seen, whether that's in soybeans, whether that's in jet purchases. I think these are the types of deliverables that demonstrate, following from the Busan Agreement, that was the last time the leaders met face-to-face last October, that there can be some cooperation in the U.S.-China relationship that doesn't result in sacrificing American strategic interests. And so the president, I believe, held that line. And as a result, this is going to be a broader maintenance check. And say, should Chairman Xi come visit the United States later in September, I expect a similar notion of seeing how the relationship has progressed since their meeting this point in May, and then making sure that the competition continues. I think that's inevitable rather than seeing any major breakthroughs at this time.
The big one is always, Chris, going to be Taiwan. And to Andrew's point about whether we had structural changes, here's the president on this question of whether he would defend Taiwan.
Would the U.S. defend Taiwan if it came to it?
I don't want to say. I'm not going to say that. There's only one person that knows that. You know who it is? Me. I'm the only person. That question was asked to me today by President Xi. I said, I don't talk about those things.
There are questions, though, Chris, about whether he'll approve this arms package that's been sitting on his desk for Taiwan.
Yeah, I think we'll have to see. I will say there's good news that there was no change in policy on Taiwan independence. I think that the way President Trump framed it in that clip is actually exactly right. The U.S. policy has long been strategic ambiguity. That is still clearly the policy. That's exactly what he said. And I think there was a lot of fears that that policy could change, and obviously it did not. The president did admit to discussing arms sales to Taiwan with China, right, which historically we have not done. That said, the real question is, does the package go through? I think he made the point, well, if Xi Jinping brings it up, what am I going to do, ignore him? Reasonable point, but the question is, are we negotiating with the Chinese about the package or just sitting there listening? If the package goes through afterward, then I think that's a very good sign. And it shows that actually the president's point that we don't want to fight a war 9,500 miles away from us shows that the best way to prevent that war is to deter it by selling Taiwan weapons. This is exactly what we should be doing. If there was an agreement to a freeze and we actually don't see a package go through, that would be very concerning.
What about your views, Andrew, on that particular issue? It goes back, this idea that we shouldn't even talk to the Chinese about it, I believe, to President Reagan in 1982, which also came up on the plane today with President Trump, and these assurances that Reagan had given. One of the 6 assurances at the time is we wouldn't consult China on arms sales. So the reporters who were on the plane asked the president about this, and here's what he said.
Well, I think 1982 is a long way.
It was.
That's a big, far distance away. No, I didn't say anything about it, but certainly, he brought that up. He talked about that to me, obviously. So what am I going to do? Say I don't want to talk to you about it because I have an agreement that was signed in 1982? No, we discussed arms sales to.
And what's his request?
We discussed to Taiwan. The whole thing with the arms sales. It was in great detail, actually.
What do you think, Andrew? Should we even be talking to the Chinese about this?
Well, I don't think we should be giving Beijing veto authority over the U.S.-Taiwanese relationship. But I think to Chris's point with the president's remarks here, he has maintained consistency on U.S. policy in the sense of maintaining strategic ambiguity, ensuring all options are on the table, and also refer to, say, Secretary of State Marco Rubio's comments, in which he reaffirmed consistently that U.S. policy towards Taiwan has not changed, despite Xi Jinping's emphasis on wanting to make Taiwan the important issue for the relationship. The president said he would heard him out. account. He'd acknowledge it, but there haven't been any policy changes, despite perhaps the president be thinking about different things. So I think, to Chris's point, we need to see what actions are taken. And as of now, the president understands, and his team that he's surrounded by recognize the importance that Taiwan has to America's national security, and I'm optimistic it'll remain that way.
Yeah, we were talking, and we have been talking throughout the week, but particularly last hour came up, TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, they control, about 90%, I think, of the advanced AI chips, so they make them. And they make a lot of them, even though they started to make them in places like the United States in recent years, in Taiwan still. So we are very, very reliant on, I know this is speculative, and the president said as much. He said, I don't talk about it. But both of you have studied this issue for a long time. So Chris, you first. If there was an issue, whether it's a blockade or invasion, how do you think this president would handle Taiwan, President Trump? Do you have a sense?
I don't think anyone really knows. I think what's important to realize is what the world would look like if that happens.
Disaster?
There's all sorts of questions about what it means for U.S. alliances and U.S. force posture. But just to the point that you mentioned on semiconductors, if the United States were to lose access to TSMC, Bloomberg did a study a few years ago that estimated it would be a $10 trillion hit to the U.S. economy.
Worse than 08.
What's that?
Worse than 08.
Far worse. Far worse. It would mean no U.S. customer could get a single smartphone, a single laptop, a single car. The whole U.S. AI industry, which is propping up the entire global economy, would go offline. There would be no data centers. It is difficult to overstate. Every single major U.S. technology company stock would crash. The TSMC is the single most important choke point of the entire U.S. economy. I think Secretary Besson has framed it that way.
Right.
And if something were to happen, it would just be cataclysmic for the U.S.
Assume President Trump knows all of this or has heard about all of this for years like everybody, but how do you think he would handle it if push came to shove? Do you know?
Well, ultimately, only the president knows. But what I do think is important that the United States has the capability to execute any order the president makes in protecting national security interests, whether that's on Taiwan, whether that's related to the South China Sea and upholding our defense commitments with the Philippines. At the end of the day, U.S. interests extend far beyond our borders. And certainly when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, what happens in the Taiwan Strait, what happens in the South China Sea, and to our allies such as Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines ultimately impact every American at home. So I think it's very important that the United States has the necessary technology, the necessary economy, and military in place to ensure that any order the president gives can be fully executed that keeps Americans safe. And ultimately, preferably, we can deter conflict, but if necessary, we can win it.
Okay, Andrew Harding, Chris McGuire, we appreciate you both. Important issues, obviously. After the break, will a change inside the Federal Reserve